Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Speak Your Truth Alternative News Hour. I'm Nathan Bray. I'm your host. I'm your former angry conspiracy theorist, and now you're born-again critical thinker. So let's open our hearts. Let's try and open our minds, and let's go on this jihad of truth. Just for the next hour, we'll even put in some tunes that reflect the stories we're going to talk about. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is Australia. You are now officially being spied on, and believe me, you've asked for it, and it's for your own protection. It's very creepy, but it's now official. And of course, we now have some evidence coming out that the US government was guilty of murdering over 1 million people. Will anything happen to them? Well, I doubt it, but we'll have a look anyway. But first of all, I just want to have a look at a couple of stories, go into these ones that the Speak Your Truth members at the Speak Your Truth group on Facebook. We've got about 1,000 people there, and they like to put up some stories that they want discussed, and of course have been talking about all week. Now remember, these people do a lot of fact checking. They look into the insides and outsides of all what potentially could be just disinformation, etc., and they do a really good job. So let's have a look at this first one. We have a solution to domestic violence and, of course, alcohol abuse and women being beaten. The government has finally come up with a solution, and guess what it is? It's a plastic card. That's right, a card in a bid to stop welfare wasters. And I love the way they make out like it's going to solve all of these other social problems, like it only exists around areas where people have lost their jobs and have about $200 a week to start spending on all sorts of things. All right, so this card, which aims to curb, as I mentioned, growing domestic violence against women and children, including in remote communities, is the brainchild of Western Australian mining magnate Andrew Forrest. That's right, a guy that's just made billions, being basically the biggest welfare recipient from the earth, from here, from Australia. They've taken it out, made a fortune, and they don't give a lot back except for a card to stop you being able to spend that measly $200 a week that you might get on the rock and roll. Now, this is the Sunday Tasmanian. Now, it understands that the federal government will go ahead with the card in the coming weeks with limited trials planned for some of the most disadvantaged areas in the country. That's right, the areas where we were promised jobs, we were promised industry. The politicians came up and they get paid a fortune, a massive welfare. It comes from you and me, right? So their wages to do all these great things for us, but when they don't, they turn around and say, listen, we've got to start putting restrictions on you. All right, so the whole concept here is that Mr. Forrest, he originally proposed the card to tackle Aboriginal disadvantage and welfare dependency, but the proposed trial will be aimed more broadly, surprise, surprise, at other communities deeply affected by violence and intergenerational welfare dependency. However, those intergenerational rich people, they won't be targeted on them at all. But let's face it, the Tasmanian welfare groups, and good on them, they've branded this idea as discriminatory, demeaning, and unworkable. So the whole concept is they're going to make it so that people on welfare, they're not allowed to go and spend money on alcohol. They're not allowed, because why would they want to drink? They're not allowed to go and spend their money on going down the pokies or having a night out at the club. They're just not allowed to do that, because that will stop them going home and beating their wives or feeding their children. Because remember, people who've just lost their jobs, they don't love their children as much as rich people. So it goes on to say that the biggest problem in disadvantaged communities is alcohol abuse, with heavy drinking a factor in up to half of all child abuse cases and domestic violence. Okay, agreed. There is a problem. Is this the solution though? So this welfare card just operates like a normal bank debit card, all right? The bank debit card. I think that's the thing that's gotten everybody into trouble. Maybe if we get rid of interest, people will stop bashing their wives too, but they won't do that. It cannot be used to buy, as I mentioned, alcohol in pubs, clubs, or liquor outlets, or for gambling. Now, finally, we've had a few groups come out. Now, the Tasmanian Council of Social Service Chief Executive Tony Reedy said yesterday his organisation was strongly opposed to a cashless welfare card. Now, he believes that the cards would be demeaning, invasive, unworkable, and very bureaucratic, a bit like the electronic food stamps that you now have in the United States. And all that's done is created a complete and entire subclass of people. Mr. Reedy agrees with that idea. He says the idea is discriminatory and ill-founded and is costly. That's right, someone's going to make a buck because it's going to cost a lot of money to create this system, and somebody's made a donation to a political party, and as a result, they're going to make a lot of coin and while creating dramas for other people. Okay, so this leading Tasmanian welfare advocate, Noel Mundy, he's also criticised the idea that people on benefits should be singled out. It's not necessarily, says, the people on welfare that are addicted to pokies. Here. That is absolutely correct. If it was, it wouldn't be a very big industry. So it's often working people, and it's often older females living at home who get involved because it's seen as a bit of company for them. Well, that's right. Just all old females should basically be banned. Are we going to do that? Probably not. But people need to be able to have the skills to manage their own money. Except for the bankers. They don't manage money, and the politicians, they get us into $18 trillion worth of debt and then come out with cards to stop us all doing what we've got to do. Now, I love how this control mechanism is brought about to combat some kind of major social issues like drugs and alcohol abuse and domestic violence among those evil and lazy welfare recipients. All while, right? Because it's all those people that are terrible. This is the story that we keep getting told. And this is while MPs who, well, they're the opposite. They're highly paid for not doing a great deal. So these MPs use their union cards to pay for prostitutes, booze, and cheat on their wives, and see, they get away with it. Like old mate Craig Stevens. See, there's no issue in politics. It's just these evil welfare recipients. Politicians are the biggest welfare recipients. They get paid a fortune. And then they misuse government vehicles, these MPs, so that they can molest a young man like Peter Slipper or torture them with text messages. And then they use that and we pay for it. They are the welfare recipients, and they're behaving even worse than people who have just lost their jobs. So maybe it's just good for job seekers, but maybe it's also going to be good for politicians. See, I think you should have maybe a poly card, not a great name, I'm open to suggestions, that stops these politicians drinking and gambling and paying for sex until, right, I don't have a problem with them drinking and gambling, and even if they want to pay for sex, I don't care about that. But once they've created the 1 million jobs that they promised, right? Because they come out and they get paid a fortune because they promised us they're going to create, 1 million jobs in 4 years or something. Once they've done that, they can go and drink all they want, okay? It should be exactly the same for them as it is for us. Because remember, that is the thing that created this problem to start with. They don't create jobs. They're worried people are going to start pointing the finger at them and maybe say, hey, we're paying you too much because you're not doing anything. So then they start pointing the finger at things in society that exist right across the board, okay? And keep in mind, remember, we all pay taxes. This is the thing people forget. There's this assumption that the government gives you, they just hand you this money. And that's just not the truth at all. We pay our taxes so that if one day we need Centrelink, we get Centrelink payments. That's something we've paid for in advance. We don't need to be embarrassed and degraded for our trouble and our time of need. That money's there for us to survive. And if one of the things we choose to do in this thing called free will, if we choose to go and have a night out, you've got $200. So you're not going to have too many nights out. And you want to go and have a drink, well, that's your choice because you paid for that money, okay? So that's the scary part here. The politicians believe that they can start controlling what is just yours. It's your right as an Australian citizen. It should be something that you deserve. So what they turn around and say to us in your time of need is you don't deserve to drink or choose what to spend your Centrelink money on. Unless, of course, it's a plasma screen from Radio Rentals, you see. There's no doubt, of course, Radio Rentals came out and made huge donations to a certain political party and now gets their $90 million in revenue direct debited from the Centrelink payments. Now, maybe radio rentals, right? Because let's face it, they get $90 million from Centrelink. Maybe they too should not be allowed to drink or smoke either. Radio rental staff, let's face it, are the biggest welfare recipients of all. I don't begrudge them. I'm not begrudging them. But I'm certainly not going to tell those staff, even though they get a lot of their money from us, the taxpayer, we don't try and tell them what they can and can't spend their money on. We just want to make out like we're solving a problem, and what we're bringing really in is a control mechanism. So it's okay, it seems, to get a big screen TV. That way you can go home and you can watch all the gambling and alcohol advertising. See, that's not an issue. You can also be told where your closest bottle shop is. You can also be told what teams and the market, I love the way they call it a market, to be able to back on. That's fine. And we can actually raise your kids in front of that TV screen, okay, because no one's got a job. And we can teach them what they can do if one day they actually get a job that's promised to them, then they can go spend their money on it. See, all of these things, if you want to get serious about it and you believe that smoking and drinking is the cause of all ills, then maybe stop the advertising. I mean, the reality is, even if you try and curtail the way people can spend their money, there is a thing called bartering. There is a thing called trading. It's something that we've kind of done for thousands of years. And what about prohibition? That certainly didn't work, or making drugs illegal. Your drug dealer is only interested in being able to get some value for something they're going to give you. And that's something that people can work around. This card, let's face it, this is about controlling people. This is about coming up with an excuse. It's that typical sort of problem, reaction, solution type scenario. So they tell us a bunch of problems that have existed in the community since Methuselah was a boy, and then they react by offering us a nanny state control mechanism as a solution. And then they roll it out across the board, taking away everybody's rights and processes. Taking out everybody's rights in the process. This is the oldest playbook in the book, and we can see it coming from a mile away. And I think it's time, let's face it, there is a social and economic tsunami coming. It's on its way. It's a global problem because we've got to change the entire structure of our financial system. And unfortunately, it looks like it's just going to have to happen. And what does the government do? It gives us a bunch of floaties to wear and make sure that we're wearing the right colour. It is quite scary to think this is the track that we're going down, and these are the people we're paying to help solve these issues by condemning the very people who are affected by it. It does all sound a little bit crazy. So what I'm going to do, we're going to cut to a little song. I think I'm getting a little bit crazed here. So I'm going to play you the Dole song by I Love My Life.
My life, it's proper sweet. I'm on the dole. I'm getting £71 a week. I'm on the dole. I just sit on my arse and I drink. I'm on the dole. Aye, my life, it's proper sweet. I'm on the dole. Dole. Aye, dole. I'm on dole. On D-O-L-E. The dole queue's full of my mates and we stink. I'm on the dole. Stink of cash cause we're getting free rent. I'm on the dole. I get paid and I'll spend it on hash. I'm on the dole. And you can kiss my cherry on bedroom time. I'm on the dole. 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 I'm on dole. On D-O-L-E. It feels right, not wrong. You couldn't have been a bit taxed for so long. Try and make them babies like twice a day. Cause I'll like increase our benefit claim. Or D-O-L-E. What the hell's that smell?
All right, so that was the I'm on the Dole song. And I just think it's very telling. This is the way society sees themselves now at times. And you know, this art is an excellent reflection. But this next story I'm going to go into, again, given to us by your Speak Your Truth members, it's pretty disturbing. All right, we now have evidence, official evidence, that everything that we've been told effectively was a lie, and it's killed over 1 million people. So declassified CIA documents, that's right. So official documents that were presented to governments, etc., but were classified, have now been declassified, and they reveal that the Iraq war had zero justification. That's right. This is really quite a frightening idea here. Okay. The justification for going to war in Iraq 13 years ago was basically based on a 93-page classified document that alleged and contained specific information on former Iraqi leader President Saddam Hussein, who we all, I'm sure, remember, and the weapons of mass destruction program he was apparently running. Now, the document's been declassified. Okay, so all the proof that they used to go to war that they wouldn't show us, all right, it's now been declassified, and the document actually reveals that there was virtually zero justification for war. So the document reveals that there was no operational tie between Saddam and Al-Qaeda, and there was no weapons of mass destruction. So they knew this. So 13 years ago, the intelligence community concluded in a 93-page document used to justify the invasion of Iraq that they knew it lacked specific information on many key aspects of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction program. But see, that's not what top Bush administration officials said during their campaign to sell the war to the American people and then to the rest of the world, countries like Australia. So those officials were citing the same classified document. So they used this same document, which didn't have zero connections to Saddam Hussein, Al-Qaeda, and weapons of mass destruction. So they asserted with no uncertainty, they were sure you're either with us or with the terrorists. So that, with no uncertainty that Iraq was actively pursuing nuclear weapons. No uncertainty is what we were told. It was happening. Makes you wonder about all these other countries, like Iran maybe, who's actively pursuing nuclear weapons and have been doing it for about 20, 13 or 14 years, and nothing's happened there. But no, hang on. We're only being lied to about this, right? So it's concealing a vast, we were told that Saddam Hussein was concealing a vast chemical and biological weapons arsenal and posing an immediate and grave threat to the US national security. Now, Congress eventually concluded that the Bush administration may have overstated its dire warnings about the Iraq threat, and that the administration's claims about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program were not supported by the underlying intelligence reporting. But that underlying intelligence reporting contained in the so-called National Intelligence Estimate, the NIE, that were used to justify this invasion have remained shrouded in mystery up until now. Now let's get to the facts here, all right? This isn't some document that was misread or misunderstood. This was just a complete lie. We were sold a complete lie. So as a result of this complete lie told to us by these politicians, now admitted, all right, we had over 1 million Iraqis, okay, innocent civilians, women and children that have been killed based on these lies told by these elected officials that taxpayers pay for, okay? John Howard, he sent Australian soldiers to their deaths based on lie. Not only that, but it's more that I think that the torment, that people, the PTSD, etc. Okay, the post-traumatic stress syndrome that then affects families, and it can affect people for a generation. That this sort of trauma just stays in your field, and the whole time, as a result of all this, and the people that were being like countries that was torn apart. Okay, as a result, ISIS was born out of Iraq, as we know. They were known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, due to the slaughter, and now Western allies support, train and arm these same ISIS people. Now, how can we trust the latest stories are any more real than the last bunch of lies? This is where this all does become very, very creepy. Once upon a time, sure, we were angry conspiracy theory people, but once we started to look at things and start breaking down the information and become critical thinkers and break down information like this, suddenly you were hoping it was a conspiracy theory. Now it's a fact. Now it's declassified fact. And now we know that we're responsible for killing over 1 million people for absolutely no reason. And our government, right? This is why it's so funny. Our government is worried about people on Dole buying alcohol and going to pokies while politicians gamble with millions of people's lives and destroy their homes and their families and get them on boats, and people have to escape and come to countries like Australia and then be persecuted, right? It's absolutely insane. But the worst part is, right, these war criminals, they do not go to jail. These neocons profit, and the general public gives away their rights and freedoms in the process. Remember, we're giving away our rights, which we'll get to in just a moment. So then, I guess, what is the solution here? What can we do? Well, our entire country is currently in a violent and deadly relationship with our Western allies and corporate elite. We're like that woman being beaten by a husband who drinks too much and lies all the time. They're in a very, very volatile situation. So what do we say? We always come to the rescue and say, you've got to get out. Grab the kids, get out. You've got to get away from them. We're in this relationship. As a country, collectively, we're connected. We're in this relationship with our Western allies, okay, and all the corporate elites. That's the relationship that we're in. We're being abused, and we've got to get out of it. Our nation, okay, as a solution, we need to protect its sovereignty, and we need to flee this deadly and violent relationship as soon as possible. That's what we've got to do. We've got to get out. And I know that all sounds very heavy, but when you really let it sink in and you realize that people are just looking after themselves, they don't care about you, okay, something has to be done, or this will just continue to go on, and we will have all the sorts of dramas that we've got at the moment, but only worse. Okay, but there is a step being taken right now. There is things being done. So, and this is another good story that was put through. It's about Australia is ready to join the $100 billion China bank, they call it. So this is good. This is really good news, because at the moment we are literally under the thumb of these crazed global elite people who'll just lie to you. So how do we know? And now with evidence coming out about 9/11, etc., how do we know any of that was true? Really? 3,000 people died, so you go and kill 1 million for no reason? It does certainly allow you to open your mind enough to ask the questions. And I think once we get the answers, sure, we're not going to like them, but I think that will then allow us to take the next step to say, well, what do we want for ourselves collectively? Well, one of the things I think we want is this: Australia is ready to join this $100 billion China bank. So Cabinet's National Security Committee has cleared the way for Australia to invest as much as $3 billion to join this China-led $100 billion, it's called the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. Okay, so this is really exciting stuff. We're actually getting out of this relationship with these lunatics, okay, and we're starting to move into a place where your sovereignty is respected. So Fairfax Media can reveal that the committee's green light is expected to lead to a formal decision to sign up to the precedent-setting Chinese initiative when the full cabinet meets on Monday, marking a milestone for China's influence in the region. But you've got to remember, it's not just about swapping the witch for the bitch here. We're literally getting out of one totalitarian, oligarchical, lunatic society, okay, where we don't have any control and we're just sold a bunch of lies, to a place where your sovereignty is respected and you collectively are part of something much bigger to create infrastructure, things that we all get to use, okay, not a welfare card, okay? So these leaked details of this high-level discussions this week follow 6 months of messy debate, which has set cabinet ministers and US allies against each other. Oh, you bet it has, right? You bet it has. Because that's exactly what we need to happen. We need to let these people know who keep promising us they're going to save us from the boogeyman, we're not interested to play anymore. We understand you're a bully. We understand bad things have happened to you, but we don't want to play with you anymore. We want to go and play over here. We've got to get away from this IMF, etc., and these banking cartels, and we've got to go and choose another option that actually protects our own individuality. Okay. So I think it is time to send our US allies and these banking oligarchs a very clear message that Australia wants out of this deceitful and deadly relationship, and it's ready to look out for itself once again. Now, it is a very, very frightening thought to think that all of these soldiers who think they've been fighting, all right, against a common ill all turns out to be lies. So I'm going to play you a track here. This is a rap song. This is US Army rapper, soldier, combat veteran. Okay, his name's Soldier Hard. All right, I'm going to put it on right now so you get a bit of a clear idea. Even the people you thought that you respect, these soldiers who are out there doing this job, now it's turned out to be a lie. Let's hear what they got to say.
Let me dig deep down in my soul, y'all. I'm gonna tell y'all a little story. It's a true story now. You know what I'm saying? This is starring combat veteran. This goes out to all the combat veterans out there. One love, y'all. I'm a combat veteran. They sent me far away. They trained me to kill, to fight in foreign place. I serve hard, didn't complain, yeah, I did my job. Now I'm back home, life now is hella hard. I'm thinking everyone around me is out to get me. Here backfire from a car, I get jumpy. Easily startled, I stay on my guard. Damn, I need some help, I even pray to the Lord. This post-traumatic stress disorder get the best of me. I just wanna be like before and how I used to be. I'm shaking all the time, these trailers, yeah, they come and go. And at times I don't even wanna live no more. I can't sleep, these nightmares keep reminding me of everything that I did and everything I seen. Damn, and in my dreams I'm just hella scared. Even though I'm home, part of me still over there. I'm a combat veteran, they sent me far away. They trained me to kill, to fight in foreign place. I serve hard, didn't complain, yeah, did my job. Now I'm back home, life now is hella hard. Combat veteran, they sent me far away. They trained me to kill, to fight in foreign place. I serve hard, didn't complain, yeah, did my job. Now I'm back home, life now is hella hard. I'm a combat veteran, easily irritated, easily pissed off. We unappreciated. How do I fit in? I can't live a normal life, cause I don't feel a thing and I just divorced my wife. Keep your comments to yourself, you wouldn't understand. I could try and tell you, still you wouldn't understand. Served our country with pride, lost so many friends. We fought hard and deep down, we'll do it all again. We know that many haters, protesting demonstrators, throw up a peace sign, a slap in our faces. Pills don't work, so we self-medicate. Hard liquor is our best friends every day. Man, I don't understand how we came to this, and everybody all around me think I'm dangerous. Yeah, I'm a combat veteran. I'm looking in the mirror, Lord, can I live again? I'm a combat veteran. They sent me far away. They trained me to kill, to fight in foreign place. I serve hard, didn't complain, yeah, did my job. Now I'm back home, life now is hella hard. Combat veteran. They sent me far away. They trained me to kill, to fight in foreign place. I serve hard, didn't complain, yeah, did my job. Now I'm back home, life now is hella hard. Can't get close to nobody, yeah, I trust none. And I always gotta keep me a loaded gun. Part of me is still fighting on the battlefield. The VA is so quick to feed us some pills. I really wish that I was me again. Wish I could smile like I did back then. But I'm broken, y'all, no hope. I guess that's why I just really wanna be alone. I'm a combat veteran. They sent me far away. They trained me to kill, to fight in foreign place. I serve hard, didn't complain, yeah, did my job.
So that was combat veteran. It's a frightening tale to think that if the combat veterans feel this way, they must have seen something over there. They must have realised something wasn't right. And now it turns out with these declassified documents, they're 100% spot on. Not only that, could you imagine being invaded by a bunch of people who are killing your families, destroying your homes, destroying your infrastructure, destroying your country on false pretenses? No wonder ISIS. I mean, no wonder it exists. They created it. They've admitted to creating it, and now they're funding it and they're using it. They are the reason, okay, that ISIS exists. They're giving them ammo. They're looking after the wounded soldiers in hospitals in Israel and Turkey. They're providing them the training, which they did because they wanted them to go and fight another enemy because they were seeing what they were doing to their own people. These people are absolutely psychopathic. And, when history looks back onto this, we're either going to have created a much better world, and maybe it's things like this will allow us to do it, okay? But, my heart goes out to all people affected by this war, and the fact that it was a lie is, wow, it's extraordinary. All right, so this next topic I want to get into is now a result of this fear, which turned out to be lies, okay? We now have your internet service provider, or ISP, will soon, and this is in Australia, will start handing out your personal information to corporations. That's right. So corporations and the government and its agencies will be spying on every one of you, okay, in the form, and I love this, they call it metadata. We're not really spying on you. We're just taking metadata. I dig it. So these new laws will force internet providers to release our private browser history, so corporations can punish illegal downloaders with huge fines. Oh, it's not children being bashed. It's those pesky illegal downloaders now. I love this. And this is, of course, the whole thing came about on the back of the need for these new terror laws. Okay, because a guy who had his kids taken away from him was a non-con man. Okay, this Manos, Haros, whatever you want to call him. All right, in the Link Cafe, suddenly they just named it. They said, we're going to call that a terrorist attack. That's what we're going to do. And then as a result, we can push laws through, even though it wasn't a terrorist attack. He had people for 17 hours. He didn't kill anybody. He's not a member of the death cult. He brought the wrong flag, okay? You're calling it that because you want to be able to pass laws like this. And you already had them on the drawing board, and you were having trouble getting them through. And then as a result, this is what's going on. So corporations are pitching the scheme as something that is designed to educate people. That's right, it's designed to educate me. So the scheme fails to address the reasons behind downloads and instead dangerously allows corporations to invade your private lives like they're not already. So corporations are always desperate to educate us. It's so fantastic. We live in a fashion that best suits them. That's what they want. They want us to live in a way that best suits them to be able to, as cheaply as possible, sell us lots of overpriced stuff so they can make profits for themselves. And a way of doing that is spying on us, okay? And it's called brainwashing, and they use fear to be able to succeed in doing this. So the TPP, all right, which you'll all hear about fairly shortly, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is designed to give corporations the same power as governments and stop governments, thing that we're supposed to control, all right, but let's face it, are paid for by donations by corporations, to stop governments from infringing on corporations' ability to make profit. That's right. If we decide that something we don't want and they're making it, they can now sue us because, well, these guys don't want it and they're trying to stop it. They have the power of the governments. They can sue the governments. So okay, to go on with that, what if the people who vote in governments, like you and I, apparently, what if we do our bidding and we don't want their products because they're dangerous, unhealthy, and they take away our freedoms, or just bad for the environment? Well, the corporations can force the government, okay, or we, the people who pay for the government, right, to pay huge fines. Even if we say no, we have to pay for their products anyway. Now, this is becoming completely insane. I was always wondering why a corporation has the same rights and power as a person. They can open a bank account, okay? They can pay money to a government in the form of voting, etc. They have the power basically of a person, but now they have the power of a government, okay? And that's quite scary. So I think what we need to do, and I agree with this here, that we need to protect our private data, all right? Because our private data is who we are to a degree. It's a reflection of who we are. And I think we need to stop these corporate internet spies from receiving that data. So in Australia, we'll have one of the most invasive and anti-piracy laws in the world. So ISPs would issue notices to people who actually breach this scheme. And if you wanted to complain against the notice, you would only be able to do so if you paid a fee. And worse still, complaints against notices would be heard by a panel comprising mostly of chosen people in the industry, and there'd be no way, okay, to appeal the panel's decision. So this is total control. The government creates the panel. Corporations who pay the government put the people from their corporations inside that panel, okay, and they get to completely control what you do. Okay, and the big point that's made here is the scheme doesn't even address the reasons behind the behaviour. So research from Australia's leading consumer advocacy group, Choice, found that people downloaded content because of the affordability, like that's going to change, and its timeliness, like I need it right now from where I am, okay, and I can't afford to go to a shop or go somewhere else to get it. So the scheme does not facilitate cheaper and faster content from Australians, okay. This proposal puts more power in the hands of corporations, and they're basically using our personal information, okay. It'll just be handed out. And we'll get harshly punished, and big business will profit, from this situation. So the question, obviously, I'm being asked this week especially is, so what's being stored and for how long? So the legislation will require telecommunication companies to retain customers' phone and computer metadata for 2 years. Now, remember, metadata is a way of, in a sense, containing or describing data. So it's sort of like saying, okay, you've got your phone call. We're not going to actually get the content of that phone call, but we're going to know where the person was, where the phone call happened, and where the other person was, and we know the number, and we know how long it went for. Okay. Then they come out with things like, and they're going to hold that for 2 years, right across the board. Okay. Why? To stop evil downloaders, or once ISIS disappears again, they'll move on to something else. So they're going to define which types of data must be retained. As I mentioned, phone calls, length of phone calls, email addresses. So all your email addresses, when you sent messages, etc., all of that is actually going to be watched and controlled. And the biggest joke of it all is they said, we're not going to be, we're not going to be looking at what people are browsing at. Don't worry if you're still watching porn. Okay, don't worry about that, mate, because we're not going to be looking at the pictures, but you'll have the address. They're going to have the address. It's not hard for them to go and see exactly what you were looking at. And that is where it becomes a complete fallacy. Okay, and then they just try to push this through on the back of a false narrative based on that Lint Cafe, and then a bunch of people who just got arrested. Remember, they just got arrested, those guys. They bought a knife. We haven't heard anything about that. Just while they're pushing this through. The big carrot is that journalists will, in fact, have some protection. Okay, and this is also a bit of a joke. So agencies, authorities, they'll need a warrant, okay, and to be able to go after journalists' information. Because remember, they've got all of their, all the whistleblowers, okay, all their sources, etc., that they want to protect, okay. So a public interest advocate, this is what happens. A public interest advocate, okay, comes along and they're appointed by the Prime Minister. And they'll say, hey, why do you want all that information? Why do you need all that information from that journalist? But the journalist isn't even there to explain themselves. The journalist isn't even there to say, hey, look, why do you need this? You don't need it. I'm doing a story. No, the journalist doesn't even know what's happening. And some person appointed by the Prime Minister goes in and tries to argue in your defence, and they call it protection. All contacts basically will be known, etc. Sources and whistleblowers, they will be blown. And think of all the government scandals. Do you think this whole situation with the union card and paying for prostitutes and Peter Slipper, do you think any of that would get out if a journalist was trying to write a story on it? Do you think the public interest advocate is going to allow that to happen when they're appointed by the Prime Minister? We're not going to know anything. And the other part too is that the laws, they don't apply to ASIO. ASIO can do whatever they want. So they aren't protected at all. And the best bit is here, Tony Abbott, he comes out talking about how fantastic it is. He talks about how he didn't have this protection when he was a journalist. Now, Mr. Abbott, remember, he wrote for the news magazine, The Bulletin, and for The Australian in the early 1980s before becoming press secretary for then Liberal leader John Hewson. Remember him, the guy that couldn't explain GST? Now, Abbott basically says, when I was a journalist, I can't do his voice, there was no metadata protection for journalists, and if any agency, including the RSPCA or the local council, wanted his metadata, then he could have just gone and got the authorisation. So now they're protected by putting someone in place that he puts in place that can decide to argue on your behalf without you being there. So he said this new measure will force agencies to get a warrant to access journalists' metadata. And it was an unprecedented additional level of protection. What are you talking about? You've got a condom with holes in it, you put it on, and your protection is to put another condom over the top with holes in it. And you call it protection. It's another layer. It's another layer. Mate, Tony Abbott, when you were a journalist, there was no Facebook, there was no YouTube, there was no Google, there wasn't even a dial-up, you lunatic. And as for the worldwide mainstream media, it wasn't owned back then by 6 large corporations either. This is insane. This guy's talking about metadata, and he was a journalist in the 1980s. What were they going to get off him? What was he writing about? Was he writing about how AIDS was going to take over the world and we needed to kill all the homosexuals? Or, Russia's about to drop a nuclear bomb and we're all going to die. Oh, you know what? Now it's just Ebola. Oh, and now we're back to Russia again. Really? Are these the things that they're going to protect you from? For Tony Abbott to compare his time as a journalist to now is absolutely ludicrous. And agencies now given access to an unprecedented amount of data about our lives and our work. So the volume and the type of data now available was beyond imagination in the 1980s. Was he writing an article about ALF maybe? ALF, there was aliens coming, I don't know, but the whole thing just sounds absolutely crazy. So Australia is going in the opposite direction of the US and the UK with its proposed metadata laws, which threatened to usher in a new dark age of investigative journalism. I'm just reading it here. That was written by Nick Xenophon. Now remember this, George Orwell, he just said, journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. The reality is, let's face it, mainstream media protection of journalists is a farce in itself, even if it was real. Okay? News anchors and journos are owned and controlled by a handful of corporations, reducing reporters, as Orwell suggested, to nothing more than being info babes, pushing government's agenda created by corporate donations that put them there, right? And remember, according to this Amber Line, a 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, okay, CNN is routinely paid by the US government and foreign governments to selectively report on certain events. They just make stories up. They create them. And furthermore, the Obama administration pays CNN for editorial control over some of the content. This is the issue. We don't have any levels of protection. We've been sold lies for the reason for them spying on us and creating cards for us. I'm sorry to say this has been a pretty depressing show, but I think it's very enlightening in that we get a very clear picture of some of these issues in society. Please come to our Speak Your Truth page, join the group. We'd love to get your feedback. We're critical thinkers. We're not conspiracy theorists. This is Brazy, Nathan Bray. I'll speak to you next week.